They say that in a court of law, the loudest voice isn't the one that screams. It is the one that whispers the truth. I am a barrister of the King's Counsel. I have spent my life tearing apart liars, dismantling alibis, and looking into the eyes of the guilty without blinking. I thought I could spot a crime from a mile away, but the biggest crime was happening in my own bed, right beside me. My husband James is a good man, too good for this wretched world. Soft-spoken, gentle, the kind of man who apologizes when you bump into him. We live in a glass tower in Canary Wharf, high above the London rain. It should have been perfect. But for months I have watched him wither away. I have listened to him grinding his teeth in his sleep. I have seen the terror in his eyes whenever his mobile phone vibrates. He told me it was just work stress. He told me his father, back in Cornwall, was too ill to see us. He told me to trust him, and I did. Until last night. James had finally passed out from exhaustion. His phone lit up on the nightstand, a single message from his stepmother, Eleanor. I never touch his phone, but something in the air felt heavy, something cold and malicious. I slid the screen open and my entire world shifted on its axis. It was a photo of his father, a man I have never been allowed to meet. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in grey skin, and the text underneath read, "He is coughing up blood again, James." The medication costs £5,000. I know you have it. If you don't send it by morning, I suppose we will just have to let the poor old dear suffer. Don't be a bad son again. I scrolled up, month after month, year after year. Threats, guilt, emotional torture. Hundreds of thousands of pounds drained from my husband to feed a woman who calls herself family. They think James is weak. They think he is alone. They think they have the perfect victim. But they made one fatal miscalculation. James is not alone. He is married to me, and I do not negotiate with terrorists. I destroy them. I am going to take my husband back to that house in Cornwall. I am going to walk into that den of vipers, and I am going to burn their world to the ground, not with fire, but with the law. This is not just a family drama. This is an execution. If you want to see how a barrister exacts the ultimate revenge, if you want to join me on this journey to hell and back, comment the number 1 below right now and let the trial begin. The morning sun over Canary Wharf was grey and unforgiving. It filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, casting long, cold shadows across the marble kitchen island. I sat there with a cup of black coffee, watching my husband. James was moving around the kitchen with a frantic sort of energy. He was trying too hard to be normal. He was making toast. He was checking his watch. He was straightening his tie for the 3rd time in a minute. To anyone else, he looked like a busy executive preparing for a day in the city. But I am not anyone else. I am a barrister. I spend my days reading the microscopic twitches on a witness's face. And right now, my husband looked like a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly on the 2nd syllable. He didn't look me in the eye. He focused intensely on the coffee machine, as if it were the most fascinating object in the world. "No, thank you, James," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I have had enough." He paused. The spoon clattered against his saucer, a tiny, sharp sound in the vast silence of the apartment. He forced a smile, a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Right, well, big day today," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "I should probably head out early. The traffic on the A13 is a nightmare." He was running away. He was fleeing the scene of the crime before the interrogation could begin. I let him take 2 steps towards the door. Then I reached into the pocket of my silk dressing gown and I pulled out his phone. "You forgot this," I said. James stopped dead. His back went rigid. Slowly he turned around. His eyes locked onto the device in my hand. It wasn't just a phone anymore. It was a smoking gun. It was the evidence of his torment and his betrayal of our trust. I stood up, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I walked over to the kitchen island and I placed the phone down, face up. The screen was still open to the message from Eleanor. The image of his dying father stared up at the ceiling. "Sarah." "I can explain," he stammered. His hands were shaking now, visibly shaking. "It's not what it looks like. I didn't want to worry you." "Sit down, James," I commanded. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. In court, the judge doesn't scream to get order. The judge simply speaks, and the room obeys. James slumped onto the bar stool. He looked small, defeated. The air of the successful London financier evaporated instantly. Replacing it was the terrified little boy from Cornwall, the boy who was never good enough for his stepmother. "How much?" I asked. "How much have you sent them over the last 5 years?" "I don't know," he whispered, putting his head in his hands. 200,000, maybe more. She says he's dying, Sarah. She says he's in pain." "Look at me." I waited until he lifted his tear-stained face. "I am a lawyer. I deal in facts, and the fact is you are being bled dry." "But what if it's true?" he cried out, desperation in his voice. "What if he really is suffering? I can't live with that guilt, Sarah. He is my father." I looked at the photo on the screen again. I studied the shadows under the old man's eyes. I studied the angle of the bedsheet. My instincts were screaming at me. Something was wrong. Not medically wrong, logically wrong. The text message was too perfectly crafted to inflict maximum pain. It was a weapon. I took a sip of my cold coffee, and I made a decision. "Call your secretary, James," I said, picking up the phone and sliding it back to him. "What? Why?" He blinked, confused. "Tell her to clear your schedule for the next week." I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. "And then go to the bedroom and pack a bag. Pack warm clothes. It's windy by the coast this time of year." James stood up, panic rising in his chest again. "Coast? Sarah, what are you talking about?" I turned back to him. My expression was made of steel. "We are not sending any more money via bank transfer, James. If your father is truly that sick, if he is truly on his deathbed, then it is our duty as family to be there. We are going to Cornwall. Today." The safety of London faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the relentless grey mist of the M4 motorway. We drove in silence. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the tyres on wet tarmac, and the hypnotic sweep of the windscreen wipers slashing back and forth like a metronome counting down to a disaster. I watched James drive. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. He wasn't looking at the road. He was looking into the past. James never talks much about his childhood in Cornwall. He describes it in vague, polite terms. Quiet, remote, peaceful. But I have seen the scars it left on him. Not physical scars, but the kind that make a grown man apologize for taking up space. The kind that make him desperate to please people who only see him as a bank account. He is a man starving for affection, and his family knows exactly how to dangle a crumb of love in front of him, just to watch him dance, just to watch him pay. As we crossed the border into Cornwall, the landscape changed. The motorways dissolved into narrow, winding country lanes. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the trees became twisted, skeletal shapes, clawing at the clouds. The rain didn't fall here. It attacked, hammering against the glass with a violence that made me flinch. The signal on my phone flickered and died. No service. 2 words that should have annoyed me, but instead they sent a shiver down my spine. We were cut off. We were on their territory now. "It's just up here," James whispered. His voice was barely audible over the wind howling outside. "The house on the cliff." We turned off the main road onto a gravel track. Mud splattered up the sides of our pristine Range Rover. And then, through the gloom, it appeared. Blackwood House. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress of misery. A sprawling Victorian monstrosity perched precariously on the edge of the cliffs. The stone was dark and slick with moss. The garden was an overgrown jungle of thorns and nettles. It looked like a place where happiness went to die. James killed the engine. The silence that rushed into the car was deafening. All I could hear was the distant roar of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the rocks below, and the shallow, rapid breathing of my husband. "Are you ready?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the front door as if it were the mouth of a beast. I unbuckled my seatbelt and looked up at the house, scanning the facade. My eyes travelled up the crumbling brickwork, past the ivy choking the drain pipes, to the second floor. And there, in the window on the far left, I saw it, a figure, standing perfectly still, watching us. It was too dark to see a face, but I felt the weight of their gaze, heavy, cold, calculating. I blinked, and in that split second the curtain twitched and the figure vanished into the darkness. They weren't just home, they were waiting for us, and they knew exactly which car we were driving. If you think we should turn this car around and drive back to London right now, comment the number 2 below. But if you want to see me walk through those doors and face the devil, stay with me, because the door is about to open. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked like she had been preserving herself in vinegar. Eleanor, my husband's stepmother. She was wearing a cream cashmere cardigan that I instantly recognised. It was from a Bond Street boutique, costing at least £600, draped casually over her shoulders in a house that smelled of damp and rot. Her hair was dyed a fierce, unnatural shade of blonde, and her smile was tight, like a rubber band about to snap. "James," she sighed, ignoring me completely. "You look dreadful, darling. The city air clearly doesn't agree with you." She stepped back to let us in. The hallway was dim. The wallpaper was peeling in long, mournful strips like dead skin. There was a bucket in the corner, catching drips from the ceiling. Pling, pling, pling. Yet on her finger, a diamond ring glinted in the gloom, a rock the size of a quail's egg. I did the mental arithmetic instantly. The roof repair would cost 2,000. Her ring cost 10. The math was sickening. "Eleanor," James said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is Sarah, my wife." She turned to me then. Her eyes swept over me, assessing the cost of my coat, the brand of my shoes. She didn't see a person. She saw a net worth. "Sarah," she said, offering a hand that felt like a cold, dead fish. "We finally meet. James talks about you, occasionally. I suppose you're the busy type." "I am a barrister, Eleanor," I said, gripping her hand firmly, perhaps a little too firmly. "I specialise in fraud and asset recovery. It keeps me very busy indeed." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a flicker, but I saw it. Suddenly, loud, aggressive music thumped from the living room. A girl slumped in the doorway, chewing gum with her mouth open. Chloe. She looked about 20, sullen, bored. She was wearing ripped jeans and holding a phone case covered in crystals. But it was the bag at her feet that caught my eye. A limited edition designer tote, fresh from the current season, sitting on a floorboard that was riddled with woodworm. "Chloe, say hello to your brother," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Sup, Chloe muttered, popping a bubble of gum. Did you bring the money? Chloe, Eleanor scolded, though her eyes were laughing. Where are your manners? They just arrived. Let the poor boy breathe. James looked around the hallway, his eyes wide with distress. Is Dad upstairs? Can I see him? Not yet. Eleanor blocked the staircase with her body. He's resting. He had a terrible night, coughing up blood until dawn. It broke my heart to watch. She pressed a hand to her chest theatrically. I've been by his side for 48 hours straight. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. Every penny goes to his care, you know. I don't spend a thing on myself. She adjusted her cashmere cardigan as she said it. The lie was so bold, so audacious, it was almost impressive. I decided it was time to test the waters. I reached into my bag and pulled out the gift I had bought in London. A bottle of vintage Bordeaux, notes of blackberry and leather, expensive, heavy. We didn't want to come empty-handed, I said, holding the bottle out. I know how stressful caregiving can be, Eleanor. I thought you might appreciate this. Her eyes lit up. The mask of the grieving wife slipped, revealing the greedy predator beneath. She snatched the bottle from my hand, caressing the label. Oh, wonderful, she purred. I do love a good red. How thoughtful of you, Sarah. I hope you find time to enjoy it, I said softly. James tells me nursing him is a full-time job. You must be exhausted. And then she slipped. She was so distracted by the expensive wine, so confident in her control over James, that she forgot who she was talking to. Oh, I'll find time tonight, she chuckled, clutching the bottle to her chest. I'll pop this open as soon as I lock his door. Once I give him his sleeping pills, he's out cold for 12 hours. I don't have to check on him at all. It's the only peace I get. The air in the hallway froze. James didn't notice, but I did. She had just claimed in her text messages that he needed constant, round-the-clock monitoring for his breathing, that he was in critical condition. Yet here she was, admitting she drugs him into a coma so she can drink wine undisturbed. She wasn't caring for a dying man. She was storing him. I smiled, a sharp, predatory smile that she didn't understand. Enjoy the wine, Eleanor, I said, because I have a feeling it might be the last vintage you taste for a very long time. If you want to know what I found when I finally forced my way into that locked room upstairs, comment the number 3 below, because the smell of death is getting stronger. The journey up the staircase felt less like climbing and more like descending into a crypt. The carpet under my feet was threadbare, smelling of wet dog and neglect. Eleanor walked ahead of us, her keys jangling at her waist like a jailer. She stopped in front of a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. It was the only door in the house that looked reinforced. She fumbled with a large iron key, grumbling about the lock sticking. James stood behind her, trembling. He was a 40-year-old man, but in this hallway, in the shadow of this woman, he was a terrified child again. Now listen, Eleanor said, turning the key with a sharp metallic clack. Don't expect too much. He doesn't look like the man you remember, James. The sickness has changed him. She pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. It wasn't just the smell of sickness. It was the smell of stagnation, a thick, cloying cocktail of bleach, old lavender, and something underneath it all, something sweet and rotting, like fruit left too long in the sun. It was the smell of a body that is slowly giving up. The room was plunged in darkness. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight against the storm outside, blocking out every photon of light. The only illumination came from the blinking green LEDs of the medical machinery. And the sound, that terrible rhythmic sound. Hiss, click, wheeze. The ventilator pumped air into lungs that could no longer do the job themselves. "Dad?" James whispered, his voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. He rushed to the bedside. I followed slowly, my barrister's brain trying to override my human instinct to look away. But I forced myself to look, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The man in the bed was not a man. He was a husk, a skeleton wrapped in parchment-thin skin. His cheekbones protruded so sharply they looked like they might tear through his face. His mouth was open slightly, a dry, dark cavern. Tubes snake in and out of his nose and arm, tethering him to this world against his will. James fell to his knees beside the bed. He took his father's hand, a hand that looked like a bundle of twigs, and he began to weep. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know." Eleanor hovered by the door, arms crossed, watching with a look that was supposed to be sympathy, but looked more like impatience. "I told you, James, he can't hear you. The doctors say his brain is mush. He's just existing." I stepped closer. I walked to the other side of the bed, away from James and Eleanor. I looked down at my father-in-law, at the man whose fortune was funding Eleanor's designer wardrobe. And then I saw it. His eyes. They were wide open, staring up at the ceiling. But as I leaned over him, blocking the light from the machine, the pupils constricted. They reacted to the shadow. He wasn't brain dead. He was in there, trapped inside a prison of his own flesh. I leaned down, my face inches from his. I whispered so low that even the ventilator couldn't drown me out. "Mr. Blackwood, if you can hear me, blink twice." For a moment, nothing happened. Just the hiss and click of the machine. I thought I was wrong. I thought perhaps he really was gone. But then, slowly, painfully, the eyelids fluttered. Once, twice. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at his hand, the one resting on the white sheet. Not the one James was holding, but the other one. The index finger twitched. It was a microscopic movement, a spasm of pure will. He was trying to lift it. He was trying to draw something on the bedsheet. I held my breath, watching that trembling finger. It dragged across the fabric, a vertical line, then a curve. It looked like a question mark, or perhaps the letter P, for poison, for police, for help. He was about to finish the shape. He was about to tell me the secret, when suddenly a hand clamped onto my shoulder, hard, digging into my flesh with sharp fingernails. "That's enough!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice piercing the silence like a knife. "Get away from him! You're crowding him! Look at the monitor! His heart rate is spiking! You're killing him!" She yanked me back with surprising strength, throwing herself between me and the bed, smoothing the sheet down frantically, erasing the invisible mark he had tried to make. "Out!" she hissed, her face twisted into a mask of fury. "Both of you, out, before I call the doctor and have you banned from this house forever." James stood up, terrified, apologizing profusely. He dragged me towards the door, but as I was pulled away, I looked back over my shoulder one last time, at the man in the bed. His finger was still twitching, and his eyes were locked onto mine, screaming a silent plea that I understood perfectly. He wasn't dying from old age. He was being murdered. If you want to see how I broke back into that room to find out what letter he was trying to draw, comment the number 4 below, because the investigation starts tonight. Dinner was a masterclass in hostility, served on fine bone china that was chipped at the edges. We sat at a long mahogany table, James and I on one side, Eleanor and Chloe on the other. like opposing armies separated by a no-man's land of silver candlesticks and dead flowers. The wind rattled the window panes, threatening to shatter the glass at any moment, but the atmosphere inside was far colder than the storm outside. The meal itself was an insult. Lukewarm tomato soup from a tin, served with stale bread. It was the kind of meal you served to unwanted guests to make them leave faster. But Eleanor didn't seem to notice the quality of the food. She was too busy feasting on my husband's guilt. "It is funny, isn't it?" Eleanor said, swirling the red wine in her crystal goblet. "How life turns out. I remember when you left for London, James. You promised you'd come back every month. You swore you wouldn't forget your roots." She took a sip, her lips stained purple like a vampire. "And now look at you." A fancy suit, a fancy car, and a father who had to wait 5 years to see his son's face again. James stared down into his soup, his shoulders hunched. "I wanted to come back, Eleanor. You know I did. But every time I called, you said he was too sick. You said visits would upset him." "Did I?" She laughed lightly, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Or is that just what you tell yourself to sleep at night? Your father cried for you, James. On his birthday, on Christmas. He called your name, and I had to hold his hand and lie to him. I had to tell him you were simply too busy making money to care about a dying old man." I watched James crumble. I watched the light go out of his eyes as he absorbed her poison. This was gaslighting in its purest form. She had isolated him, blocked his access, and now she was rewriting history to make him the villain. I wanted to reach across the table and shatter the illusion. I wanted to scream the truth. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. So I stayed silent, my barrister's mask firmly in place, observing, cataloguing, waiting. "It's the medication that's the real struggle now," Eleanor continued, changing tactics from guilt to money. "The new painkillers the doctor prescribed, they are extortionate, £300 a week, and the insurance won't cover it," she sighed theatrically, looking at Chloe for support. Chloe didn't look up from her phone. She was texting under the table. "We've had to cut his dosage in half this week. Can you imagine that, James? Your father, lying upstairs right now, moaning in agony because we can't afford to numb the pain." James looked up, horrified. "You cut his dosage? Why didn't you tell me? I would have sent the money instantly." "I didn't want to be a burden," Eleanor said softly, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "We try to manage. We make sacrifices. I haven't bought myself a new dress in 4 years. We live on scraps just to keep him comfortable." I looked at her plate. She had barely touched her soup, but her wine glass was empty again. She reached for the bottle in the centre of the table to refill it, the bottle I had brought. The vintage Bordeaux, notes of blackberry and leather. Market value £500. My eyes narrowed. I did the maths in my head. The bottle she was currently draining like water cost more than a week's supply of the medication she claimed she couldn't afford. She was literally drinking his pain relief. She wasn't cutting his dosage because of money. She was cutting it because she preferred the taste of expensive wine. I watched her lift the glass to her lips again, the ruby liquid catching the candlelight. She smiled at James over the rim, a smile of total victory. She thought she had won. She thought we were just a checkbook with a pulse. "This wine is delicious, Sarah," she said, licking her lips, "though I do detect a slightly bitter aftertaste, don't you?" I picked up my spoon, my reflection distorted in the silver. "That's not the wine, Eleanor," I said quietly. "That's the taste of karma. It takes a while to kick in, but when it does, it chokes you. If you want to join me as I wait for the house to sleep so I can hunt for the truth, comment the number 5 below, because tonight The hunter becomes the prey. The grandfather clock downstairs chimed 2, a deep, mournful sound that vibrated through the floorboards and settled in the pit of my stomach. The storm outside had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a silence that was heavy, oppressive, and utterly sleepless. Beside me, James was fighting a war in his sleep. His sheets were twisted around his legs like vines. His breathing was jagged. Every few minutes, he would whimper, a high, thin sound of distress that broke my heart. He was dreaming of his father, dreaming of the guilt that Eleanor had force-fed him at the dinner table. I reached out and brushed the damp hair from his forehead. He flinched at my touch. Even in his dreams, he expected pain. I lay on my back, staring up at the cracks in the ceiling plaster, tracing them like maps of a foreign country. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing, replaying every look, every word, every sip of wine. The numbers didn't add up. The expensive ring, the designer bag, the cheap food, the locked-in syndrome that looked suspiciously like paralysis. And the way Eleanor's eyes shifted when I mentioned the law. She was hiding something far worse than simple greed. Then I heard it. It was faint at first, barely a whisper over the settling of the old house. Creak. Footsteps. Not the slow, shuffling steps of a tired caregiver, but the heavy, clumsy steps of someone who was intoxicated. I held my breath, straining my ears against the darkness. The footsteps stopped, and then came a sound that made my blood boil. Laughter. A stifled, giggling sound, coming from the room at the far end of the corridor. Chloe's room. It wasn't the sound of a daughter grieving for a dying patriarch. It was the sound of a party. I heard the clink of glass against glass, the low thrum of bass from a speaker turned down low, and a voice, Chloe's voice, slurring slightly. He's such a pushover. Did you see his face when Mum started crying? Pathetic. My hands curled into fists under the duvet. They were mocking him, while James lay here, tormented by nightmares of his dying father. They were down the hall, drinking the wine I bought, and laughing at his suffering. They weren't just parasites, they were sadists. I looked at James one last time, sleeping the sleep of the innocent. He couldn't fight them. He was too close, too emotional, too broken by their manipulation. But I wasn't. I was the outsider. I was the shark in their swimming pool. I made a decision. I slid my legs out from the warmth of the covers. My bare feet touched the floorboards. The wood was freezing, biting into my skin like ice. But I didn't pull back. I needed the cold. I needed it to sharpen my senses, to wake me up fully. I stood up, moving as silently as a shadow. I didn't put on my dressing gown. I didn't look for my slippers. I walked to the bedroom door and turned the handle, slowly, millimetre by millimetre, until the latch clicked open. The hallway stretched out before me, a tunnel of darkness leading into the belly of the beast. The laughter from Chloe's room came again, louder this time, careless. They thought everyone was asleep. They thought they were safe in their web of lies. I took the first step into the corridor. The floorboard groaned under my weight. But the laughter didn't stop. Good. Let them laugh, because I was coming for them, and I wasn't going back to bed until I found something that would wipe those smiles off their faces forever. If you are ready to creep down this hallway with me and see what they are really hiding, comment the number 6 below. But be quiet, or they will hear us. I crept past Chloe's door. The laughter inside had died down to a murmur, but the bass still thumped through the wood, like a heartbeat. I moved further down the hallway, towards the small utility room adjacent to the father's bedroom. Eleanor called it the medical suite, a grand name for what was essentially a converted linen cupboard. I pushed the door open. It swung silently on oiled hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the chemical tang of bleach and something metallic. I didn't dare switch on the main light. Instead, I pulled out my phone and activated the torch. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating shelves stacked with towels and boxes of latex gloves. But my target wasn't the shelves. It was the silver pedal bin in the corner, overflowing with the week's refuse. I am a barrister. I am used to dealing with the dirty laundry of society. But digging through my stepmother-in-law's rubbish felt particularly sordid. I stepped closer. I lifted the lid, and the smell of stale sickness wafted up. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves from the box on the shelf. Snap. And I began to dig. The top layer was mundane. Used tissues, cotton wool balls stained with dried blood, empty wrappers of chocolate bars. But as I dug deeper, pushing past the surface-level debris, I began to uncover the truth, layer by layer. First, I found the blister packs, dozens of them, empty foil skeletons that glinted in the torchlight. I picked one up and squinted at the text. Zopiclone, 7.5 milligrams. Sleeping tablets, strong ones. I counted the empty packs. 1, 2, 5, 10. There were enough sedatives here to knock out a horse for a month. Eleanor had said she gave him a pill to help him rest. But this wasn't rest. This was a chemical coma. She wasn't managing his pain. She was managing his consciousness, keeping him under so he couldn't speak, so he couldn't ask for his son. I continued to dig, my mind working like a scanner, searching for the expensive painkillers she had cried about at dinner, the ones that cost £300 a week. I searched the entire bin. I turned over every piece of rubbish, but I found nothing. No morphine bottles, no high-end analgesic boxes, no receipts from the pharmacy, nothing. In a court of law, the absence of evidence is often the most damning evidence of all. If the medication wasn't here, then she hadn't bought it. The money James sent hadn't gone into his father's veins, it had gone into Eleanor's pocket, and probably onto her finger in the form of that diamond ring. I was about to close the lid, disgusted and furious, when something at the very bottom caught my eye. It was buried under a pile of wet wipes, a small brown glass bottle. It looked old, vintage almost. I reached in and pulled it out, holding it up to the light. The label had been aggressively scraped off, leaving only sticky white residue and jagged paper edges. Why? Why scrape the label off a medicine bottle? Unless it wasn't medicine at all. I unscrewed the cap and sniffed cautiously. It didn't smell like antiseptic. It didn't smell like alcohol. It had no smell at all. Odourless, tasteless, invisible. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I knew this profile. I had studied it for the Regina versus Blackwood case I was building in my head. The perfect weapon for a slow, quiet, domestic murder. I slipped the bottle into the pocket of my silk dressing gown. Evidence item number 1. I stripped off the latex gloves and dropped them back into the bin, arranging the rubbish to look undisturbed. I was just turning to leave, planning my next move, when I heard it. The sound of metal on metal from the hallway. The handle of the utility room door. It was turning, slowly, deliberately. Someone was on the other side, and I was trapped. The room was a dead end, no windows, no second exit, just me, the evidence in my pocket, and whoever was about to walk through that door. I clicked off my phone torch instantly, plunging the room back into pitch blackness. I pressed my back against the shelving unit, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The door creaked open. A slice of yellow light from the hallway cut across the floor, widening, widening, until a silhouette filled the frame. If you want to know who is standing in the doorway and if I can talk my way out of this, comment the number 7 below, because I think I'm about to be caught red-handed. The silhouette stepped into the room, and the smell of stale vodka and cheap menthol cigarettes filled the air. It wasn't a monster. It was Chloe. She fumbled for the light switch, and the harsh fluorescent strip above us flickered to life, flooding the small room with an unforgiving white glare. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I stood perfectly still, my back straight, my hands calm inside the pockets of my silk robe, clutching the glass bottle I had just stolen. Chloe jumped when she saw me, actually jumped. Her hand flew to her chest, and for a second I saw the fear behind the heavy eyeliner, but she recovered quickly, replacing the fear with a sneer of teenage bravado. "What the hell are you doing in here?" she demanded. Her voice was slurred, pitchy. She swayed slightly in the doorway, blocking my exit. "You're snooping. Mum said you'd be a snoop." I looked her up and down, slowly, dissecting her appearance with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. Her pupils were dilated, her skin was pale, and there was a fine dusting of white powder on the rim of her nostril. "I was looking for a glass of water, Chloe," I lied, smoothly, effortlessly. "But it seems I took a wrong turn, though I must say, you seem to be having quite a party in your room. Is that how you mourn in this family, with vodka and cocaine?" Chloe's face flushed a blotchy red. "Shut up, you don't know anything." She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use her height to intimidate me. "This is our house, you're just a guest who asks too many questions." I laughed, a low, cold sound that made her blink. I took a step forward, forcing her to take a step back. "Let me correct you on a few points, Chloe. First, this is not your house. This house belongs to your stepfather, my husband's father. Second, I am not just a guest. I am a barrister of the King's Counsel. Do you know what that means?" She stayed silent, sullen, chewing on the inside of her cheek. "It means I eat liars for breakfast." I lowered my voice, making it dangerous. "And I can smell a liar from a mile away. You're not grieving, Chloe. You're celebrating. You're waiting for the old man to die so you can cash in. But here is the problem." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the alcohol on her breath. "I'm here now. And I am very good at freezing assets. If I find out that a single penny of my husband's money has gone up your nose instead of into his father's care, I will make sure you end up on the street with nothing but that fake designer bag to keep you warm." Chloe's eyes widened. The defiance crumbled. She looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. But then a nasty glint returned to her eyes, a cornered rat baring its teeth. She realized she couldn't win with logic, so she resorted to the only weapon she had left: fear. She stepped aside to let me pass, but as I walked into the hallway, she spoke, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're so smart," she sneered. "City girl, with your fancy suit and your big words." She leaned against the doorframe, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "But you should be careful where you step around here, Sarah. The cliffs are crumbling. The ground isn't stable." She looked up at me, a smile playing on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "People have accidents in Cornwall all the time. One wrong step in the dark, and whoosh, straight down to the jagged rocks. And the tide washes everything away before morning." I stopped, my back to her. The threat hung in the air, heavy, explicit, stupid. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her over my shoulder. "Is that a threat, Chloe?" "It's a warning," she giggled. A hollow, empty sound. "Watch your step." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I walked back to my bedroom, the glass bottle heavy in my pocket. She had just made a fatal mistake. She thought she had scared me, but all she had done was confirm my theory. Innocent people don't threaten to throw you off a cliff. Only guilty people do. If you want to see me secure the DNA evidence that will seal their fate, comment the number 8 below, because the investigation just became a murder case. The bottle in my pocket was a start, but in a court of law, a bottle found in a bin is circumstantial. The defence would argue it was old, or that I planted it, or that it belonged to a previous tenant. To build a case that would withstand the scrutiny of a judge, I needed undeniable proof. I needed biology. I needed the poison to be inside him. I waited until the house settled into a deep, drug-fueled silence. 3 a.m., the witching hour. I slipped back into the hallway, moving past James, who was still twitching in his nightmare-ridden sleep. I had a small pair of nail scissors from my vanity kit and 2 sterile evidence bags I always kept in my briefcase. Old habits die hard. The door to the old man's room was still unlocked. Eleanor was so arrogant, so sure of her dominance, that she didn't even bother to secure her prisoner. I slipped inside. The ventilator was still hissing, rhythmic, monotonous, keeping time for a life that was running out. I approached the bed, my heart aching for the man lying there. He looked so small in the vast darkness. I turned on my phone torch, dimming it with my finger so it wouldn't wake the house. "Mr. Blackwood," I whispered. "It's me, Sarah. I'm going to hurt you a little bit, but I promise it's for a good reason." His eyes were open, scanning my face. He didn't blink. He didn't panic. He understood. I took his hand. His skin was paper-thin and cold as marble. I lifted his index finger, shining the light on his fingernail. And there they were, faint white horizontal stripes crossing the nail bed. Mace's lines, the classic signature of heavy metal poisoning. Arsenic or thallium depositing itself in the keratin. It was written on his body like a barcode. "I need to take this," I whispered. With steady hands, I clipped the nail. The sound was a tiny snip that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silent room. I dropped the nail into the first plastic bag. Then I moved to his head. I needed hair, specifically the root, to prove the timeline of the poisoning. I found a patch of hair near the pillow. "Forgive me," I said, and I pulled. He didn't flinch, but as I sealed the hair into the second bag, I saw it. A single tear leaked from the corner of his eye. It rolled down his hollow cheek and disappeared into the pillow. It wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of relief. For the first time in years, someone was seeing him. Someone was helping him. I leaned down, my lips brushing his ear. "I have what I need now," I vowed, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely control. "I am sending this to London. The best forensic lab in the country is going to analyse it." I gripped his hand tight. "Hold on. Just hold on for 48 more hours. I am going to get you out of here. I swear it on my life." He blinked once, slowly. A silent thank you. I left the room, the plastic bags burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat by the window in the living room, watching the sun rise over the grey Atlantic Ocean. At 6 a.m, a black motorcycle pulled up at the end of the driveway. It was my contact, a private courier I used for sensitive documents. I walked out into the mist, the gravel crunching under my boots. I handed him the envelope containing the nails, the hair, and the mysterious bottle. "Direct to the Kensington lab," I instructed. "Hand delivery. To Dr. Aris only. Tell him I need the toxicology report yesterday." The rider nodded, visor down, faceless. He revved the engine, a roar that shattered the morning peace. And then he was gone, speeding back towards civilization, carrying the fate of this family in his saddlebag. I watched him disappear. Then I turned back to the house. Eleanor was watching from the upstairs window, her face a pale blur behind the glass. She didn't know what I had just done. She didn't know that the clock had started ticking. But she knew the war had begun. If you want to be there when the results come back and I drop the bomb on this family, comment the number 9 below, because the verdict is coming. 48 hours is a long time in a house full of enemies. We spent it in our room, barricaded against the hostility outside. James paced the floor until he wore a path in the dusty rug. I sat by the window, my phone in my hand, waiting for the signal that would end this nightmare. The rain lashed against the glass, relentless, unforgiving, just like the truth. Then, at 7:02 p.m, it happened. A single notification chime cut through the silence. Ding! It was an email from Dr. Aris at the Kensington lab. Subject, urgent, toxicology report, reference, Blackwood. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked the screen. I am a barrister. I have read autopsy reports that would make a soldier weep. But this was personal. I opened the attachment, and the words leapt off the screen like a physical blow. Positive detection, lethal concentrations, thallium sulfate. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the horror wash over me. Then I stood up. "James," I said. My voice was disturbingly calm. "Sit down." He stopped pacing. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Is it the results? Is he dying?" "Sit down, James," I repeated. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hands gripping his knees. "The report confirms what I suspected." I walked over to him. I needed to be precise. I needed him to understand exactly what they had done. "Your father isn't sick with a degenerative disease. He is being poisoned." James made a sound like a wounded animal. "Poisoned? By who? Eleanor?" "Yes," I said. "She is using thallium. It is an odourless, tasteless, heavy metal salt, historically known as the inheritance powder, because it was the weapon of choice for people who wanted to kill their relatives for money without getting caught." But why does he look like that? Why can't he talk?" James asked, tears streaming down his face. "That is the cruelty of thallium." I sat next to him, forcing him to look at me. "It attacks the nervous system. It causes hair loss. That is why he is bald. It causes muscle atrophy. That is why he is paralyzed." I paused. This next part was going to break him, but he had to know. "But the worst part, James, the absolute worst part, is that it doesn't affect the mind." James froze. "What?" "He is awake," I whispered. "He isn't senile. He isn't in a coma. He is fully conscious. He feels everything. He feels the burning sensation in his feet, which is a classic symptom. He feels the hunger. He feels the thirst. And he hears everything. He hears Eleanor drinking his wine. He hears Chloe laughing. And he heard you crying for him. But he couldn't answer because his vocal cords are paralyzed." He has been trapped in his own body, in agonizing pain, for months, while they spent your money on handbags. The silence that followed was terrifying. I watched James's face transform. The grief evaporated, replaced by something dark, primal, violent. His pupils dilated until his eyes were entirely black. The veins in his neck bulged. He stood up slowly, a low growl rising from his chest. "She knew," he whispered. She knew he could hear me. He looked around the room. His eyes landed on the heavy iron fire poker by the hearth. He walked over and picked it up, testing its weight. "James," I said, standing up, "what are you doing?" "I'm going to kill her," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to smash her skull in." He turned towards the door, moving with a terrifying purpose. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a son avenging his father. "James, stop!" I shouted. But he didn't hear me. He reached for the door handle, his knuckles white on the iron poker. I ran across the room. I grabbed his arm. He tried to shake me off. He was strong, fueled by adrenaline and rage. "Let go of me, Sarah. She deserves to die. She tortured him." "James!" I grabbed his lapels and I did the only thing I could do. I swung my hand back and I slapped him across the face, hard. The sound of flesh hitting flesh cracked through the room like a whip. James stumbled back, dropping the poker. It clattered loudly on the floorboards. He looked at me, shocked, his hand touching his stinging cheek. The madness in his eyes began to clear, replacing it with confusion and agony. "Sarah," he choked out. I grabbed his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "Listen to me," I hissed fiercely. "We are not murderers. We are not them. If you walk out that door and kill her, you go to prison for life, and your father dies alone. Is that what you want? Is that what he wants?" James shook his head, sobs racking his body. "But she can't get away with it. Sarah, please, she can't." "She won't." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight as he collapsed against me. "She isn't going to get away with it. But we don't use fire pokers, James." I looked over his shoulder at the door, my eyes cold and calculating. "We use evidence. We use the courts. We use the absolute crushing weight of the justice system. We don't kill her, James. We bury her. We bury her under a mountain of paperwork and prison bars so heavy she will never see the sun again." If you want to see exactly how I set the trap for the final confrontation, comment the number 10 below, because the trial begins at breakfast. The morning of the execution was bright and cold. The storm had finally blown itself out, leaving the sky a hard, piercing blue. Inside the bedroom, we were preparing for war, but not with guns, with wires. "Lift your arm," I instructed. James obeyed silently. I pressed the cold adhesive of the microphone against his ribs, just beneath his heart. I taped it down securely, smoothing the edges so it wouldn't rustle against his shirt. It was a high-fidelity dictaphone, the kind used by undercover police officers, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room. "Is it hidden?" James asked, his voice steady now. The hysteria of last night had been replaced by a grim determination. "It's invisible." I buttoned his shirt up, adjusting his collar. "Now listen to me, James. This is the most important performance of your life." I grabbed his shoulders, looking deep into his eyes. "When we go down there, you cannot be angry. You cannot be the son who knows the truth. You have to be the victim. You have to be broken, defeated, desperate. She needs to believe that she has won, that she has crushed you. Because when Eleanor feels powerful, she gets careless, she gets arrogant. And arrogance is where she will make her mistake. James nodded. He practiced his expression in the mirror, slumping his shoulders, letting his face fall into a mask of misery. I can do it, he said. I'll tell her I'm transferring the money, the full amount for the new lungs. Good, I stepped back. The moment she admits to the fraud, the moment she confirms she's taking the money for herself, the trap snaps shut. The police are already stationed at the bottom of the lane, waiting for my signal. James sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. It was my turn to get ready. I went to my suitcase. I didn't choose the comfortable jumpers I'd worn for the drive. I chose my armour. A tailored black blazer, sharp enough to cut glass. A silk blouse, white as a sheet of paper. And stilettos. 4 inches of steel-tipped resolve. I stood before the vanity mirror. I applied my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. Foundation to cover the sleepless circles, mascara to sharpen the gaze, and finally, lipstick, a deep blood red, my war paint. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't just a wife. She was the law incarnate. She was Nemesis, and she was hungry. Sarah, James asked quietly from behind me, are you sure this will work? What if she doesn't talk? I capped the lipstick. The sound was a sharp click. She will talk, James. I turned to face him. Criminals like Eleanor always talk, because they think they are smarter than everyone else in the room. She's dying to brag. She just needs the right audience. I checked my watch. 10 a.m. It's time. I slipped my own phone into my blazer pocket, setting it to record as a backup. Let's go down to breakfast, or should I say, high tea? I walked to the door. James followed. We stepped out into the hallway. The house was quiet, but I could smell it. The scent of Earl Grey tea and fresh scones wafting up from the drawing room. She was waiting for us, waiting for her payday. I reached the top of the grand staircase. My heels struck the wood. Clack, clack, clack. Each step was a declaration of war. I looked down into the hallway, descending like an avenging angel. I wasn't walking into a trap anymore. I was the trap. If you want to see the look on Eleanor's face when the defeated wife turns into the prosecutor from hell, comment the number 11 below. The court is now in session. The drawing room was a stage set for a tragedy masked as a comedy. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. On the low table, a 3-tiered cake stand displayed scones, clotted cream, and cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off. It was the perfect picture of British civility, if you ignored the fact that the hostess was a murderer. Eleanor sat in the high-backed armchair, queen of her decaying castle. She poured the Earl Grey from a silver pot, her movements fluid, practiced. The liquid amber streamed into delicate bone china cups. Tinkle, clink, splash. Sugar, Sarah? She asked, her voice light and airy. 2 lumps, thank you, I replied, matching her tone perfectly. I need the energy. It's been an exhausting visit. James sat next to me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He looked pale, which was perfect for the role he was playing. He cleared his throat. Eleanor, he started, his voice trembling just the right amount. I've done it. I called the bank in London this morning. The transfer for the new ventilator and the specialist nurse. £50,000. It should be in your account by noon. The effect was instantaneous. Eleanor's shoulders dropped. A flush of genuine pleasure rose in her cheeks. She didn't look at James with gratitude. She looked at him like a butcher looks at a prize pig. "Oh, James," she sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "Thank goodness. You have no idea what a relief that is. Your father will be so comfortable now." "Comfortable?" Chloe snorted from the sofa, already calculating her share. "Yeah, finally." Eleanor glared at her daughter to shut up. Then she smiled at me. "Well, that is settled then. We can all relax. Have a scone, Sarah. They're fresh." I picked up my teacup, blowing gently on the steam. "You know, Eleanor," I said, my voice taking on a reflective, storytelling quality, "this situation, the devotion you show to your husband, it reminds me of a case I worked on last year, in Kensington." Eleanor paused, her scone halfway to her mouth. "A case?" "Yes," I took a sip. "A very sad case. A wealthy older gentleman, married to a much younger woman. Everyone thought she was a saint, nursing him through a terrible, mysterious illness. I looked directly at her. He lost his hair. He lost the use of his legs. He couldn't speak. The doctors were baffled." The room went very quiet. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Sounds terrible," Eleanor said, her voice a little tighter than before. "Old age is a cruel mistress." "That's what everyone thought," I continued, leaning forward slightly, until a tenacious lawyer decided to test his hair follicles. "Do you know what they found?" I didn't wait for an answer. "Thallium. It's a heavy metal poison, tasteless, odourless, soluble in water or in tea." Eleanor put her cup down. It rattled against the saucer, a sharp, discordant sound. "Why are you telling us this, Sarah? It's hardly appropriate dinner-table conversation." "Oh, it's just an anecdote," I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The fascinating thing was how they caught her. She got greedy. She kept asking for money for treatments that didn't exist. She thought because the husband couldn't speak, he couldn't testify. But she forgot one thing. The body keeps the score. The poison leaves a map, right there in the fingernails." I saw Eleanor's eyes dart to her own hands, then to James, then back to me. The colour was draining from her face, underneath the layers of expensive foundation. She was beginning to realise this wasn't a story, this was an indictment. "I think," Eleanor stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands, "I think I have a headache coming on. The stress of the last few days." "Sit down, Eleanor," I said, my voice dropping the pleasantries completely. "We haven't finished our tea." I lifted my cup again, staring at the dark liquid swirling inside. Then I looked up at her, my gaze locking onto hers like a laser sight. "It is delicious, though," I said, "very fragrant. Tell me, Eleanor, did you add any special spice to mine? Or do you save the special ingredients only for your husband? If you want to see the moment the mask shatters completely and the monster reveals herself, comment the number 12 below. The polite conversation ends now." Eleanor froze. Her hand hovered over the back of the chair. Her knuckles were white. The silence in the room was shattered by the sound of paper hitting the table. Thwack! I threw the toxicology report down, right next to the cucumber sandwiches. The red stamp, lethal, seemed to pulse in the sunlight. "What is this?" Eleanor whispered, though I knew she could read it perfectly well from where she stood. "It is the end of the line, Eleanor." I stood up, towering over the table. "It is a report from the Kensington Forensic Laboratory, dated this morning. It confirms that my father-in-law has massive amounts of thallium sulfate in his system." I pointed a manicured finger at her. "You didn't just drug him with sleeping pills. You have been systematically poisoning him for 6 months. A pinch in his tea, a drop in his soup, just enough to paralyse him, just enough to make him look like a dying invalid, so you could beg James for money. Lies, Eleanor hissed, her face twisting into something ugly. You're hysterical. He's old. His body is shutting down. Shut up, James roared. He stood up, knocking his chair over. Don't you dare lie any more. We found the bottle, Eleanor. Sarah found it in the bin. Eleanor flinched. Her eyes darted to Chloe. Chloe was shrinking into the sofa, terrified. Mum, what are they talking about? They're trying to frame us, Eleanor shrieked, her voice losing all its refined edges, becoming shrill and common. They want to cut us out of the will. That's what this is, you greedy little witch, coming here with your London shoes and your accusations. Greedy, I laughed, a cold, hard sound. I checked the land registry, Eleanor. This house is mortgaged to the hilt. You have maxed out 3 credit cards. You spent James's money on jewellery and trips to the spa, while your husband lay upstairs burning in agony. I stepped closer, into her face. Do you know what thallium does to the internal organs? It dissolves them, slowly. He feels like his insides are on fire, and you watched him suffer, day after day. You sat by his bed and drank wine while he screamed silently for mercy. He deserved it, Eleanor snapped. The mask fell completely. The polite stepmother vanished, replaced by a monster. He promised me a life of luxury. He promised me travel. And what did I get? This rotting house, this damp, miserable prison in the middle of nowhere. She paced the room, wild, manic. He became a burden, a useless, drooling burden. Why shouldn't I take what I'm owed? I wiped his chin. I changed his sheets. I earned every penny James sent. I earned it. You earned a life sentence, I said quietly. Attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse, coercive control. In the UK, judges take a very dim view of women who poison their husbands. I looked at Chloe. And you, Chloe, accessory to murder, concealing evidence. You're young. You'll probably get out in 15 years, just in time to see your 40s wasted in a cell. Chloe burst into tears. Mum, you said it was safe. You said he was just sick. Shut up, you idiot. Eleanor lunged at her daughter, but James stepped in between them, pushing Eleanor back. Don't touch her, he growled. You don't touch anyone in this family ever again. Eleanor stumbled back against the fireplace, breathing heavily. She looked at us, realising she was cornered. Her eyes darted to the door, then to the window, calculated escape routes, but there were none. So what now? She sneered, crossing her arms, trying to regain some shred of dignity. You call the police? Go ahead. It will be my word against yours. A frantic wife making a mistake with medication. A tragic accident. I'll get a good lawyer. I'll get sympathy, the grieving widow. Oh, I don't think so. I reached into my blazer pocket and I pulled out a document, bound in blue legal tape. I placed it on the table, next to the toxicology report. We could call the police right now, and yes, the trial would be long, messy, painful for James, painful for his father. I smoothed the paper out. Or we could handle this differently. Eleanor looked at the document, suspicious. What is that? This, I said, uncapping a fountain pen, is a deed of transfer and relinquishment. It states that you voluntarily sign over full custody of Mr. Blackwood to James. It states that you relinquish all claims to this property, all claims to James's money, and all claims to any future inheritance. I tapped the paper. You sign this, you pack your bags, and you leave the country, tonight. And if I don't, she challenged, lifting her chin. If you don't, I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that chilled the room. Then I open my phone, which has been recording this entire conversation, including your confession just now that he deserved it. And I hand it to the Detective Chief Inspector, who is currently parked at the bottom of the driveway. So what will it be, Eleanor? The pen or the handcuffs? If you want to see the moment she realizes her life is over and makes her final choice, comment the number 13 below. The ink is waiting. The room was so quiet I could hear the dust settling. Eleanor looked at the pen, then at the door, then at me. Her mind was working furiously, calculating the odds. If she went to court, she would lose everything and go to prison. If she signed, she lost the house and the steady stream of income. But she kept her freedom. And knowing Eleanor, she probably had a stash of money hidden away that we didn't know about. She saw a lifeboat, a way to survive, to parasitize another family another day. She stepped forward, her heels sinking into the thick Persian rug. She picked up the fountain pen. It was heavy, black, expensive. She uncapped it with a sharp snap. She looked at me with a sneer that curdled the blood. "You're a fool, Sarah," she whispered, leaning over the table. "You have me cornered. You have the evidence, and yet you're letting me walk away?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's your problem. You have a conscience. You think that by sparing me, you're taking the high road." She looked at James. He gets it from his father. Weakness, sentimentality. "Just sign the paper, Eleanor," I said, my voice flat, bored. "My patience is thinner than the ice you are standing on." She smirked. She pressed the nib to the paper and she wrote, "Eleanor Blackwood." The scratching of the nib on the parchment sounded like claws on a blackboard. It was loud, aggressive, defiant. She signed with a flourish, underlining her name twice, as if to say, "I am still the queen here." She stood up straight, dropping the pen onto the table. It rolled across the document, leaving a tiny speck of black ink, like a period at the end of a sentence. "There," she said, smoothing her skirt. "It's done. I relinquish everything. The house, the old man, the money." She looked at Chloe. "Pack your bags, Chloe. We're leaving. We'll go to the villa in Spain." She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with triumph. "You think you've won, Sarah, but you haven't. I'm walking out of here, and I'm going to live a very long, very comfortable life, while you are stuck wiping the drool off a cripple. Goodbye, James. Try not to miss me too much." She turned on her heel, grabbing her handbag, confident, arrogant, untouchable. She reached for the door handle. "Eleanor," I called out. One single word. She stopped, looking back over her shoulder. "What now?" I picked up the document, checking the signature, blowing on the ink to dry it. "Thank you for signing this. It proves two things." I folded the paper and handed it to James. 1. It proves you are of sound mind and fully capable of understanding legal documents, so you can't plead insanity later. And 2. It secures James's assets, so you can't use his money to hire a defence team. Eleanor frowned, confusion clouding her face. "Defence team? What are you talking about? We had a deal. I sign, I leave." I smiled. And this time, the smile reached my eyes. It was cold. It was terrifying. It was the smile of the executioner. I lied. I raised my hand towards the window and I snapped my fingers. Snap. The world exploded. The front door downstairs was smashed open with a battering ram. Boom! "Police! Armed police!" The shouts echoed up the staircase. Thundering boots pounded on the wood, dozens of them, swarming the house like angry wasps. Sirens began to wail from the driveway, blue lights flashing against the drawing room walls, disorienting, blinding. Eleanor screamed. She backed away from the door. "No, no, you promised. We had a verbal contract." "I am a barrister, Eleanor," I shouted over the noise of the raid, walking towards her as the police stormed into the room. "I know exactly how to lachrymosely navigate the loopholes of the law." Two officers grabbed Eleanor, twisting her arms behind her back. She struggled, spitting, kicking like a trapped animal. "You bitch! You lied to me! You can't do this!" I leaned in close, my face inches from hers as the handcuffs clicked shut. "I can do whatever I want," I whispered into her ear. "I know how to bend the rules to get what I need." I looked at the handcuffs, then into her terrified eyes. "But I never, ever aid and abet a criminal. You poisoned my family. And now, I am poisoning your future. Take her away," I ordered the officers, as if I were the one in charge of the entire operation. And in that moment, I was. If you want to see the aftermath and the final goodbye, comment the number 14 below. The witch is dead. The sirens faded into the distance, taking the chaos with them. Eleanor had been dragged out, kicking and screaming. A disgraced queen, stripped of her crown. Chloe had followed in silence, her head bowed. Her fake designer bag left abandoned on the hallway floor, a relic of a life she would never have again. The house was suddenly quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of before. It was a clean silence, the silence of a fever that has finally broken. I stood by the front door, watching the paramedics wheel the stretcher out. They were gentle, professional. Mr. Blackwood was wrapped in a thermal blanket, oxygen mask over his face. But his eyes were open, and for the first time they weren't filled with terror. They were filled with peace. James walked beside the stretcher, holding his father's hand. He wasn't the scared boy I had met in the kitchen a week ago. He was a man who had faced his demons and won. He leaned down and whispered something to his father. I didn't hear what it was, but I saw the old man squeeze his hand back. A weak squeeze, but it was there, a promise of recovery. "We're taking him to the Royal Cornwall Hospital," the lead paramedic told me. "He's dehydrated and weak, but his vitals are stable. Now that he's off the toxins, he has a fighting chance." "Thank you," I said. "We will follow you in the car." They loaded him into the ambulance, the doors closed, and just like that, the living ghost was gone, replaced by a patient on the road to healing. James stood on the gravel driveway, the wind whipping his hair. He turned to look at me. His eyes were red, swollen, but he didn't look away. He walked towards me, slowly at first, then faster, until he collided with me, wrapping his arms around my waist, burying his face in my neck, and he cried. Not the silent, shameful tears of the past, but deep, heaving sobs of relief. He cried for the years he had lost. He cried for the pain his father had suffered. And he cried because it was finally over. "You saved him," he choked out, his voice muffled against my blazer. "You saved us both, Sarah. I don't know how to thank you." I stroked the back of his head, looking out over the cliffs towards the ocean. The sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the water in stripes of silver and gold. "You don't have to thank me, James," I whispered. "You just have to promise me one thing." He pulled back, looking at me. "Anything. Promise me we never let anyone treat us like that again," I said. "We're a family, and we protect our own." He nodded, kissing my forehead. "I promise." We walked back to the Range Rover, hand in hand. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't care about the peeling wallpaper or the damp rooms. It was just a building now, an empty shell. The monsters had been exorcised. I started the engine. The purr of the motor was a comforting sound. We drove down the winding lane, past the police tape fluttering in the breeze, past the cliffs where Chloe had threatened to push me, and back onto the main road, heading east, towards the hospital, towards London, towards a future where no secrets were hidden in the trash. They say that justice is blind, but I disagree. Justice sees everything. It sees the bruise hidden under the makeup. It sees the poison hidden in the tea. It sees the silent scream of the paralyzed. I am a lawyer, and I have spent my life fighting in courtrooms, but this week taught me something new. The most important battles aren't fought in front of a judge. They are fought behind closed doors, in the quiet corners of our own homes. We often think of family as the people who share our blood, but sometimes blood is just a liquid that can be poisoned. Real family are the people who stand in front of you when the world tries to break you. The people who listen when you cannot speak. The people who refuse to let you fall. My name is Sarah Blackwood, and I rest my case.